There's this scene in the movie Zero Dark 30 that's one of those classic tense boardroom scenes, and it's got all the CIA around a big boardroom, all the analysts together, and the head honcho himself, Tony Soprano. I mean, Leon Panetta. He's the director, and he's trying to get a clear answer because they're going to go and execute Osama bin Laden. The only problem is they don't know if he's actually in this compound in Pakistan or not. And they can't afford to get it wrong. The stakes are high. It could be an international humiliation if they send a SEAL team in and it's the wrong person. So he's going around the room trying to get probabilities, and people are saying 40% or 55%, 60%. And we as the audience, he's getting frustrated. We as the audience, we know how the history played out. So we're thinking, yes, he's in there. Go send the team in. Take him out. You got to do this now. This is your chance. And so when it gets to Jessica Chastain, and she speaks up and says the probability is
100% he's there. Okay, fine, 95%, because I know certainty freaks you guys out, but it's 100.
We're kind of with her on that as the audience because we're seeing it through her eyes. But what Philip Tetlock says in his seminal book Super Forecasting about this example is that the Jessica Chastain character here is overconfident. She's actually being unreasonable in saying that there's 100% probability because, frankly, they know it's highly likely, but 100% they couldn't really say. There could always be a chance, whether it's 5 or 1 or 10%, that they have the wrong person. So what he wants to show in there is actually this is overconfident, and that the real way that played out with Leon Panetta in real life is that he really did want to collate the room's probabilities and get people's, doubts and not sures and, well, it's this much or that much. And then what a good super forecaster do within this case is collate the room's opinion, get everyone's opinion and collate it together, and you'd have a more accurate picture. The lesson is that our degree of certainty really matters. So this was a seminal book for me. It was really, really important. When I read it a few years ago, it was kind of one of those ones that shifted my worldview or helped click something into place that I really needed. Now, the question this book really wrestles with is, can we actually become better at predicting the future? And Philip Tetlock ultimately shows that yes, we can. And he started this project called the Good Judgment Project, where he got thousands of people to make predictions on stock market prices, elections, wars, geopolitics, and what he found is that out of thousands of these people, a couple of hundred turned out to be what he calls super forecasters. They had a exceptional ability to be able to see things ahead, to be able to make educated guesses about the future. And it wasn't just ascribed to luck. These people would reliably be able to do it over and over again. So he set about saying, what is it that makes these people different? What is it about the way they think? And what he found that it was actually a certain set of tools that they used to come to their decisions. It wasn't about IQ. He says that you have to have intelligence to be able to forecast well. You have to have knowledge, but this ultimately wasn't the deciding factor. It wasn't the genius IQ people who were great forecasters. Actually, on the contrary, a lot of people who had strong, decent IQs, but they were not anywhere near geniuses, were often the best forecasters. And another result of this found that most so-called experts on TV are about as effective as a dart-throwing chimp. I don't know about you, but I aspire to at least outclass our simian cousins playing a blindfolded pub game when I think about the future. So Tetlock says that forecasting isn't a mysterious gift bestowed at birth. It is the product of particular ways of thinking, of gathering information, of updating beliefs. These habits of thought can be learned and cultivated by any intelligent, thoughtful, determined person. The problem is, basically, many of us don't consider this a skill. We just consider it as luck or just something that some people have and some people don't. It's actually neither. It's something you can learn. So I want to give you what I see as 5 essential takeaways from this book that I've used. There are actually more in the book. It's so packed with great information, but I want to give you 5 takeaways I've used to become a better thinker. Number 1, don't think in terms of yes or no. Forecast with precision. It's always dangerous if we start thinking things are 100% yes or they have 0% chance of happening. Suppose you were going to invest in Apple stock and you thought, Apple is this great brand, it's a wonderful company, they have tons of cash. I'm 100% that Apple is going to have a higher stock price in 5 years than it does now. Now, a lot of people may say, oh, you're probably right on that, it's a great company. But really, if you really stepped back and said, well, what things could go wrong here? Why could I be wrong? Well, maybe a competitor comes out and eats up some of Apple's market share. Or maybe there's a conflict with the US and China and Apple can't get its iPhones made in China anymore and their costs go up. Or maybe the brand gets damaged by a terrible scandal. These things might seem remote, but they are probabilities and we have to factor them in, and that might make us say, oh, actually I'm like 90% or 95% in my confidence. But that 5% can be huge. In fact, talking on this topic, hedge fund manager Aaron Brown said, it's so hard to see because it's not dramatic. It's the difference between a consistent winner who's making a living or the guy who's going broke all the time. Bottom line, people are more likely to go broke when they make 100% forecasts, or they're more likely to send a SEAL team to go and kill the wrong guy. Tip number 2 for being a better forecaster, break the problem into smaller parts. So one thing Tetlock shows is that you could take a complicated question and break it down into much simpler parts to get a good estimate of the answer. So there's a famous question they talk about in the book, which is, how many piano tuners are there in Chicago? Now, that may seem like the kind of question where it's impossible to actually give anywhere near an accurate answer. And you might just throw out something like, I don't know, 10,000. There are 10,000 piano tuners. But what Tetlock shows is you can get a much more accurate answer if you break this down into smaller questions. For example, you might say, how many people actually live in Chicago? Well, New York's the biggest city in the US, and that's got maybe like 8 or 9 million, and LA's got 4 million, so Chicago's smaller, so maybe like 2 or 3 million. And then you might say, well, how many pianos are there per person in Chicago? And you might say, well, maybe let's say 1 in 100 people has a piano because they're expensive. And you could keep breaking it down to say, well, how many pianos per year would a piano tuner fix? And the more you keep breaking these questions down, you can then come to a reasonable estimate. And the actual answer is something like 83. But if you'd have just tossed out a guess like 10,000 at first, you'd have been way off. The people who break it down into smaller parts are always much, much closer to the answer. Tip number 3, update your opinions constantly. So it's really tempting once you've made a prediction to hold on to it or to hold on to the level of confidence you had before. But what a great forecaster will do is constantly tweak based on new information that's coming in. So let's take a question like whether the US will ever go to war with China. Someone might have a probability on that. They might say, well, I think the probability is, I don't know, 30%. And then what they'll do, if they're a good forecaster, is change that as new things come in. So they might say, well, we've got a president who's a bit more relaxed towards China, so maybe there's 5% less chance now they'll go to war. But then they might say, if China ups its aggression towards Hong Kong, suddenly they might say, oh, now there's a 10% more chance that it will go to war because there'll be an outcry from the international community, or if China ever invaded Taiwan or whatever. So they're constantly taking their probability and just tweaking it, even by 5, 3, 2% according to new information coming in. And this is how you get much, much more accurate rather than just sticking a percentage on it and holding it there no matter what happens. Number 4, be a fox, not a hedgehog. There's an old essay by Isaiah Berlin who wrote about the fact that some people are foxes who know many things and some people are hedgehogs who know one big thing. And what Tetlock shows is the people who know one big thing, they see the world through one entire lens, like socialism or environmentalism or libertarianism. They tend to be less accurate in their thinking because they tend to put everything through a filter first of their ideology, of the thing they want to champion, their belief, and so they're less likely to be objective. The more you can take away from that, the more you can stand apart and see different views on a topic and step into different shoes, the more likely you are to be correct. 5th and final tip for being a better forecaster, don't over or underreact to new information. So Remember recently there was that UFO data that came out and they said the US had had some sightings of unidentified flying objects and it couldn't quite explain what they are, and that got people excited, like what does this mean? Are there aliens or have we been visited? What's happened? Now, if your chances before that aliens had visited were only 0.0001%, something like this, unless it was compelling, undeniable evidence that we'd been visited by aliens, you'd kind of say, well, what this does is make me revise my percentage up slightly that we have been visited by aliens, maybe by 2%, maybe 3%, maybe 5%. But the point is, you don't want to overreact to every piece of new information. Otherwise, your belief will suddenly go from this is nonsense to this is 100% certain to this is nonsense, this is 100% certain. And suddenly you're just constantly flip-flopping back and forth and you don't really know which is which, but you're certain today, and now tomorrow you totally don't believe it. And really what's better from a forecasting point of view is just to be honest with how much this updates your belief. You don't want to overreact, but you also don't want it to have no effect on your belief as well. You should be willing to change based on the information, even if it's 2-3% more. So that is it. I know I talked a lot about this book, but this is a real gem. I feel like people don't talk about it enough. It changed so much about the way I think. It's been such an invaluable tool, and it's pretty obvious I wholeheartedly recommend it. If you want to let me know what you think of this, let me know in the comments below. And I forecast that there's an 80% probability that I will be eating a buttercup before the end of the day.